Welcome back to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a production of Creation Justice Ministries. Green Lectionary is a conversation on Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derek Weston, Director of Theological Education and Formation at Creation Justice Ministries, and today we'll be looking at a text for Palm Sunday. My guests today are Reverend Sam Chamelin, farmer, gardener, and pastor of St. Mary's UCC in Westminster, Maryland, and Reverend Shannon Weston, Leadership Coach, Coach Trainer, and Church Consultant. Before we begin our episode, I want to share the launch of this year's annual resource. Every year, Creation Justice Ministries produces a resource on a particular issue, encouraging congregations to find ways to engage it. This year's resource is The Power of God, From Extractive Theology to Transforming Faith. In it, we discuss theological notions of power, just transitions to renewable energy, and stories of churches using their collective power for the sake of community. The resource also includes elements for worship, including 7 original songs. You can download the resource at www.creationjustice.org/powerofgod. Join us now as we look at Luke 19 through the lens of creation justice. All right. Our text for this week is Luke chapter 19, verses 28 to 40. After he, Jesus, had said this, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. When he had come near Bethphage and Bethany at the place called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of the disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it.'" So those who were sent departed and found it as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They said, "The Lord needs it." Then they brought it to Jesus, and after throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. As he rode along, people kept spreading their cloaks on the road. Now as he was approaching the path down from the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the deeds of power that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out." So, where is creation in this passage?
My farming background wants to talk about the donkey. Like that's where I want to start. I'm like, all right, we can hang out with the animals. So I'm excited about that. Um, of course, we have palms and we have stones. So those were the 3 things that I'm just like, okay, we can hang out and talk about those things. I'm wondering if you all see more than I am seeing on a first perusal.
Well, it's called the Mount of Olives for a reason. Like, it is an olive grove that they are coming down. Um, I served the first church that I served was Bethany Presbyterian Church, and so, like, I learned a lot about the little town of Bethany that is right outside of Jerusalem.
Great congregational pride.
Right, exactly. And, but anyway, it's where, Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. And anyway, they come down this Mount of Olives, which was an olive grove that they went through that still exists. Like there are thousands and thousands of year old olive trees there. So there's creation there too, I think. Um, yeah.
Have
Um,
either of you been to any of these locations?
I was in Jerusalem once when I was 19.
Okay. All right, I just want to be careful. Like, fact checkers want to make sure that I'm not saying anything about Jerusalem that isn't actually true because I've never been there.
Well, so the joke is here that, like, so before we started, there was something I had to look up. And so I wanted to share because even though I was not on a religious pilgrimage, I was there for a religious studies class, and we were actually studying, this was 1999, and we were studying, the mandatory military, like, having to go into service. And so we were kind of doing a cultural tour and having those discussions. It was a very interesting class. Anyway, but the gate that they go through, the gate that they're working their way down through, is the eastern gate into Jerusalem. And so today, if you take this pilgrimage, you walk this through this olive grove. It's now a giant graveyard, which, people in Jerusalem are buried above the ground in a stone casing. And so, because when the day of resurrection comes, people will stand and walk through the gate. That's what happens, because the Messiah will walk through the gate. And I don't know the year or anything, but the gate is now stoned up. Like, so when it was under Muslim rule, one of the many, many times that it was, they stoned the gate up so the Messiah couldn't walk through it. And it's one of my favorite moments when I think about this story of like the stones will cry out. So let's just stone up the wall because the Messiah couldn't possibly walk through the gate then if if it was all, the Messiah who could make the stones cry out, Anyway, so it's just amusing me. That's my fun
Yeah,
gate fact.
that stone thing feels ominous, given that later Jesus is going to say, "Not one stone is going to be left on top of another."
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Cool, go ahead and bar the gates. That's fine."
Right. Yeah.
Let's see
Yeah.
how
Go
that
ahead,
works out
brick them
for you.
up. Brick them up. See if I care. But it's interesting though. Like I don't think like it's just. I think about all the people that go to national parks and are like, it's just a bunch of rocks, and I'm like, right, that's part of creation too. Like the bunch of rocks.
Hmm.
Well,
Anyway.
and I guess that's interesting to me. And it kind of leads into where I was kind of going as I was thinking through this. And this is kind of I haven't I'm not like way ahead in sermon prep in terms of all these things. So like this is kind of my first pass through. Like I haven't thought really deeply about this beyond the fact that I've preached this, time after time after time. But it's funny. It's like to me, each one of these creation elements that we've kind of identified are pointing towards the kingship and the rule of Jesus. Like that is underneath all of this, but it is not the people that make Jesus a king. It's the creation elements that make him a king. Like Jesus would be a king without a single person following him, kind of thing. And the stones kind of do that. Because there's all this stone imagery throughout Luke. Luke, has, one of them, early on, chapter 3, verse 8. John the Baptist is out proclaiming and all that, and they say, wait a sec, the I want to make sure I get this right. Was it the Pharisees? There were a group of people who come
Probably.
to Jesus and they say, hey, we have Abraham as our ancestor. We don't need any of this other. And John says back to them, look, God could raise up children of Abraham from the stones. So the idea that, followers of the Messiah can come from anywhere, can come from the created order. Certainly the donkey is an illustration of Christ's lordship, kingship, all those sorts of things. And the palms, celebrating, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So it's creation that is speaking to kind of this royal motif throughout all of this that I think is the beyond even what the people do. Creation pointing to the kingship of Jesus is the deepest part of creation's role in this passage for me. I don't know if that makes sense or we need to flesh that out, but that's something that kind of sticks with me as I'm reading it through this kind of more of a green or creation lens.
Well, and what I appreciate about that, Sam, is we often talk, especially in the last couple of years since 2020, we've really emphasized the fact that this was a counter protest, or this was a protest
Yes.
against Herod's entry, like this very governmental parade that
Yes.
happened, and this was happening on the backside of that entry. So like there was just this very but that later, right, it's a crown of thorns, like his comes from nature and not gold, right? So there's that very last crusade element of this is a cup of a carpenter kind of thing.
I'm actually really glad to hear you say that because I have preached that and I couldn't remember where I had heard that counter narrative of Herod. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't just pull that out of thin air. I remember reading that somewhere, but I don't remember who it was.
No, there was a governmental parade into Jerusalem because all the people were there for Passover, for the celebration of the beginning of Passover, and Herod showed up and did his thing, and they said, you know what, we're going to go over here and do this. And I don't know that I would go so far as to say the cult is mocking, right?
Sure.
But you could very easily go that far. And there's that amusing part of the Lord needs it thing, right? With the cult, like that,
Yeah.
so that there's, I don't know where creation is in this, but the human interaction in this is really funny. It's just downright hilarious, right? Like, well, what happens when they say, hey, you're stealing my donkey? You say the Lord needs it. And they go, oh, okay, no problem. Right? Like what's going on here? That's always amusing as well.
See, that always encourages me about Jesus. I'm like, okay, Jesus tells me exactly what to say, and if I say it, it'll all work out. And I'm like, thanks, Pete. This is the guy I can get behind. I want to get in this parade.
There you go.
But no, the and the whole donkey piece. I mean, certainly the idea that just saying the Lord has need of it speaks to the preeminence of Christ, like that. And one of the things that I enjoy doing at this time of the year is going back and looking at all the donkey imagery that is related to David. Clearly, Jesus is pulling on that imagery. He's
Mhm.
pulling on the Zechariah reading. Your Lord will come to you riding on a colt, and all of the anti-war, anti-empire, motifs that brings with it. But I think now I might be admittedly a little playful, and Derek, maybe you'll cut this later. That's fine. But I really was thinking about the donkey in kind of a devotional sense. So if you could do the historical critical piece with the donkey and all of that is stuff I have preached, will preach, encourage other people to preach, that is there. But I think the donkey in and of itself, if you've ever had experience with a donkey, what happens with the donkey is really, really wild because donkeys, of course, have a reputation for being rather stubborn animals at times. And if you have any experience of young animals, you know that not only are they stubborn, but they are unprepared to interact with human expectations. I'll put it that way. Um, and so when they say this donkey's never been ridden for, it's a cult kind of thing. Like the first image that came into mind for me, as somebody who lives day to day with livestock, is how we have to break our pigs for our show season. And so for listeners who may not understand, breaking doesn't do anything to them physically. It's getting them to understand how to walk in a show ring, like getting them broken like you would break a horse to ride it. And so one of the things that and so these pigs have no idea what to do. You can take a whip to them and you can go as hard as you want. And they're like, I don't understand what's happening. What we do is you take the whip and you put some marshmallows on the end of it. And what they want is the marshmallows. And eventually they learn to walk with their heads up. They're excited. They understand kind of what the whip is supposed to do because you're very gentle with it. And if you're gentle at the beginning, you never have to be harsh with it at any time. Like if you do this right, you never have to hurt an animal doing that.
Hmm.
But you have to break an animal in. The fact that this donkey does not need to be broken in, I think speaks to the peace around Christ. That I think it actually points, there's a sense in which Christ and the way that I've watched some people interact with animals and the way they talk to animals and the way they actually engage with them as mutual creations of God, and the way that some people just, you've heard, a dog whisperer or a horse whisperer, like that's a real thing. Like I've watched people be able to interact with animals. There is a peace at the center of Christ that is reflected in the donkey who will let him ride on him. This animal with all of the baggage and kind of the cliche baggage of being stubborn. The donkey says, I don't care if this is my first ride. I trust this guy. Let's go. And I think there's something deep and beautiful about that I take a lot of peace in, because that peace of Christ walking into that crowd and ultimately into the face of Herod, as we've not Pilate, not Herod, walking into Pilate's display. I think there's something about peace at the center of this story that creation reveals. And I'm enjoying thinking about that right now as animals are being born and, our farms are coming alive and all those sorts of things. And a lot of us are dealing with very young and very immature animals.
Well, and there's also it always reminded, to be honest, it always goes back to the birth story for me, which is in the where Mary rides the donkey is in Luke, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so the there is an element where this donkey ushers him into his birth and ushers him to his death. And so there is this creation, very odd element, but there it is, right? That there's something beautiful about that cycle. And that may be symbolic right here to understand the whether or not there was actually a census, right? This big story of the donkey carrying Mary to, Bethlehem for the birth, because it was so important that Jesus was born there. And it's so important for Jesus to be ushered into his death in a similar way. There's something there as well.
Yeah. No, and I love that. And I hadn't gotten far enough back into I'm trying to let go of Christmas. I did Christmas so long this year. I'm like trying to finally let it in the review. But no, I think you're 100% right. And so this piece of Christ, this donkey bringing him in both to his birth and also to his death, donkey as a symbol. One of the things that I've read, and actually I remember a long time ago I read Pope Benedict's. He did a series of books about this, and he talks about that, like, in riding the donkey, Jesus is the king who destroys the weapons of war. And that is such a powerful image to me. And then one of the things that he talks about, which I think actually speaks to our day and time, is that if this donkey is indeed a symbol of peace, and a peace both in birth and in death, then Benedict talks about the fact that it excludes what he calls a zealot exegesis, where it's like it's not, we have Pilate on one side, Christ on the other, and it's kind of the image of a football game where we're tearing into each other and let the mighty one win. It really is completely and utterly the war machine versus the one of peace. And I feel that tear in Christian communities of all kinds right now, as I hear more and more, and this could just be my experience where I'm at my place, but I hear a little bit more of a zealot exegesis, like wanting Jesus not just to ride the donkey, but for the love of God, do something.
Right.
Right. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Sometimes that is a praise, and then sometimes that is a prayer of dereliction. And it seems there are moments in our current time where I'm like, it feels like a prayer of dereliction, and I understand that prayer. But at the core of it is still Jesus who destroys all weapons of war. And I feel myself very challenged by that in the moment, because I'm like, I'll take Jesus on the donkey if I can get a little bit of Pilate on the other side, like just a couple of weapons would be great. Except Jesus permits absolutely none of that.
Well, and before we leave this question, it's striking to me that what is missing, where creation is missing from this passage,
Right.
given that it is Palm Sunday, and in Luke's version, the palms are missing.
Yeah.
Like the tree branches are not there. And so you have to go to Matthew's version for that. They just throw down their cloaks in Luke. And so everybody's going to wave their palms in the air, and everybody in the way to church is going to get their palm. And if you read Luke's version, they're not going to be there. But,
So are you suggesting, therefore, that we should not hand out palms and just see how that goes?
I would never. I would never.
Well, it's not in the Bible. We shouldn't do it. So there we go.
It is in the Bible. It's just not in this story.
It's just not in
this story.
Not in this part of the Bible.
Yeah.
Well, so I do want to think about that for just a second, because in Matthew's version, and I believe Mark's version as well, the palms are kind of taken off of the trees and stripped from the trees, making a path for Jesus, and the people are waving them. And in this version, people are taking off their cloaks. And so on one hand, that feels like, oh, piece of creation has been taken out of the story. But it also, again, kind of takes me back to John's introduction in Luke about, like, if you have two cloaks, give one up. That the sacrifice isn't being made by creation in this story. The sacrifice is being made by humans. That it's humans who need to offer something, not the trees. The humans are the ones who need to give something up. And I want, like, it's actually a really interesting question for me as to why Luke doesn't have palms in his Palm Sunday passage. Like, Luke, didn't you know we were going to call this Palm Sunday?
We
Like,
were going to order eco palms for the rest of our lives and have them shipped from Mexico just for this purpose.
right. And maybe part of this is Luke saying, yeah, it's not for creation to give something up here. Maybe it's for humanity to give something up.
I mean, I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at it. I always thought the symbolism of the cloak was the royalty aspect, right? That's
Mm.
something that was done
Hmm.
for royalty. It's also very odd, right? Like these are not people who packed 7 clothes for 7 days, right? Like they have one cloak, one, and so to put it on a dirty, dusty road, that is, then you're gonna what, pick up and put back on, or you've been traveling for a long time or things like that. So there is a sacrifice to it. In a very symbolic, but just slightly more than symbolic way. The last church that I served, we always did a clothing drive on Palm Sunday for this
Mm.
and like literally during this part of the reading, people would throw their clothes into the aisle, and like the kids would come and collect them and whatever. And it was just, but for that, like Derek, like you're saying, like there was some sort of, now these were people who had more than enough and all those things. I'm not trying to like make them more than they are, but you know what there
Hmm.
was some element of, hey, we should be giving something here as well because we do have 2 cloaks. So here's one.
Hmm.
Here's, maybe it's not the one off my back, but here's something we can do. And we took that from this version of Luke going, why not,
Mm. I like that. So, other than throwing cloaks, where is God calling us, humanity, to interact with the rest of creation in this passage?
Well, don't hand out palms because it's not in the reading. So we said that. All right. So we're going to give you a little worship help here.
No,
No
you can
palms.
hand out kale because nobody wants to eat it.
No palms. Get a donkey. All right. And make the rocks big enough that the little kids can't get a hold of them and start throwing them. All right. So bring rocks. Just make sure they're heavier than what the kids can manage. Let's see. Sorry, I'm never getting invited on this podcast.
And if you have pigs, bring marshmallows.
Right, marshmallows.
Yes.
We put marshmallows on the end of our whips. Ugh. Can we put them on the crown of thorns too, so it's a little softer when no.
Well, I to take this more seriously, if I can introduce it's an old word for me, but one that I feel a need. I kind of want to reclaim and refill with some meaning. Can I reclaim the word evangelism here for a little bit? Because I feel like there's an evangelistic message here. Like, if again, coming back to, you really have these dichotomies of a subjugating empire, and a life-giving, kingdom that is centered upon the peace of Christ, who can ride the donkey right out of the gate because of the peace that sits there. And that feels like an evangelistic call. And if your social medias are anything like my social medias, a lot of people are really trying to figure out where they want to plant their flag, and are struggling, with what kingdoms do we serve? What kingdoms are emerging? What kingdoms are coming? What kingdoms are collapsing? And I just want to offer people this hope that Pilate is not our only option. And now that makes some demands on us, like that. Christ does make demands. He is proclaimed as king here, and which means there is an obedience, I think, that comes on the backside of that. So what does it look like to be obedient towards a kingdom that is life-giving for all things? What is it? To me, I mean, just right out of the gate, it means I'm even thoughtful about how I handle the rocks, because one day that rock may be right next to me, singing the praises of the one whom I follow. And so I don't mean to be super pious with that, but I do. It was St. Clare, right, who said, walk in such a way that your feet stir up no dust. Like, walk gently through this world, because it's not just your voice that praises God. And so I think that's something that I want to, whether I'm in my barn farrowing piglets right now, or I'm preaching Holy Week, being really thoughtful about where I put my feet, and how I interact with the kingdom around me, and being mindful to make choices that lead me closer to Christ than to the other kingdoms that would make claims on me.
So I keep going back to and the whole multitude of disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the deeds of power. And then some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." And that's when he says, "The stones will cry out." I was on a webinar this morning, and basically this guy was trying to do a lot of gymnastics around. The whole webinar was how to do DEI work and team coaching, and he decided to spend the first 20 minutes giving people alternative phrases to use than diversity, equity, and inclusion, because of how a hot button of a blah blah blah. And I just kept sitting there going, this is absurd. Like, we should be leaning in, not running away.
Yeah, say what you mean.
Exactly. And like,
mean.
let's get it out. And yeah. I love the, like, so which part don't you like, friends? Diversity? Don't like diversity? Equity?
Yep.
But like, this is that moment of, we can be just as loud as they can. We have every right to be just as loud, to joyfully praise, right, this message of peace, this message of hope, and that earthly powers have no ultimate right. They will always crumble. We have just as right to proclaim that loudly as you do over here. And right now it feels like we don't have that right to do that. And this story says otherwise. And that's where I'm kind of stuck on this call of how do we actually get into the places where we get our voice louder, and not damn the consequences, because this has real consequences, but how do you lean into this faith that is holy and good? Because we just can't move past. We want to move past the fact that Jesus really was against the government of the time and doing all of this to provoke in some way against what was not good for the people. And I'm just that's to me the call in the church in this passage of it's time to wave our palms and throw our cloaks and borrow the donkeys and be as loud as we can.
Mhm. Yeah. I think for me, it's oftentimes the call to action. But the clear call to action here for me is don't be the Pharisees. Um,
Mm,
and that's I think in a lot of our denominations, that's the voice that is saying, um, these people are being too loud. This is kind of chaotic right now. I'm not into it. This doesn't feel very orderly. This doesn't feel very um proper. This doesn't feel very decent. This doesn't feel very organized. And therefore I don't like it. And so it should stop. And I think the call here is like, this is a bit of, by the time this scene unfolds, it's a bit of a menagerie. It's a bit of a circus. It's chaos. It's people screaming. It's donkeys. It's people throwing their coats everywhere. It's an outdoor worship service. Um and it's a little bit like there's no order of worship here. And that makes the Pharisees, the religious leaders, super uncomfortable that like this is kind of chaotic and some of these people are being loud. Um and it's time that we get over all of that, because oftentimes it's the people who are being kind of loud whose voices we really need to hear. And it's the people who are bringing the chaos who also are bringing Christ into the center of our community. And I just kind of feels like we've got to stop letting the Pharisees have the final word. We have to stop bowing to the will of the Pharisees and letting the Pharisees create the agenda. Um,
Can can the Pharisees speak to a certain kind of person though? I'm gonna help whoever's editing this. You might want to cut this. If we start with the proposition, as we did, that we've got kind of Pilate on one side, Jesus on the other, and again, I'm oversimplifying that. We've got this going on. Is it possible the Pharisees are saying stop because they're scared to death that Pilate's going to see it and crush it quickly?
yeah.
And on that, there are moments I'm very sympathetic to that.
Mm.
That like
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
responsibility is, as a religious leader, I'm going to identify with them first. As a religious leader, my responsibility is to take care of a vulnerable people at a heightened, at a politically charged time. I mean, Passover has lots of things. The reason Pilate is in town isn't because things always go well during Passover. Like
Right.
he's coming in because you move in the trucks because you're afraid of a riot, that
Right.
that kind of thing. And so there's a sense in which I'm sympathetic to that. And that I think can preach a sense of fear that if we don't regulate our deepest held convictions to preserve ourselves, that ultimately will be destroyed in some capacity.
Mm.
And Jesus speaks out against that, saying, actually, this peaceable kingdom is going to cry out whether you want it to or not.
Mm.
And so there's a sense I'm wondering, and like I said, if you need to cut this, you can cut this. But I am wondering if it's like fear-based religion is not your best move. And it can feel sometimes like, and I wonder if there's also this point of like, I'm going to pull back into kind of a peaceable kingdom because really I'm afraid and I don't want to cause waves. When actually this peaceable kingdom is it's assertive, it asserts itself, the rocks will cry out, the donkeys will do its thing. Like it's not peace for the sake of not making waves, it's peace because that is a different way of being a kingdom, and it is a more sustainable way of organizing our lives together, and it will serve us better than being afraid of empire. Am I way out on this?
I don't think so.
Tell me, because if I am, I might preach this. So mix it before we get there.
I'm still stuck on the fact that like the Pharisees are in the crowd, like some of the Pharisees in the crowd, like, so they're not at the other protest either. They're at this one.
Yeah, well,
So
they're watching to make sure everybody keeps it together. Like,
right, like that's my point, is like there's
like,
this,
you hear this banging in the basement, you wander down to make sure the kids aren't tearing the place apart on Sunday school, like.
but it's the in-between place, right? It's those who are in between, who are going, I know I don't agree with that, I just don't know really what to do with this.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid to, like, to me there's a lot of fear in this, like,
Yeah.
order your disciples to stop. Like, we don't want to get arrested, we don't want to get in trouble.
Mhm.
And there's, again, there's, that does speak to a certain crowd. And at what point is, right, Jesus saying like, we're way beyond that, man.
Actually, yeah, like, no,
Like,
things
that
are in
was
motion, and
that was 10 years ago, buddy.
yeah,
Like, we're here where we are now.
I am on the donkey. All right, like
Yeah.
everybody understands what is happening here. Like there's
Right.
no, like it's a bit cryptic for us because it's not our culture, but everybody in that crowd, all those disciples know exactly what is happening here. This is already in motion, and I take a great deal of comfort in that. Like Christ is in motion. Like Holy Week is going to happen again. You are not going to stop this. And no one in the world, including the most powerful empire in the world at that time, no one is going to stop the coming of this kingdom. So chill with all the fear stuff. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it's coming. And
Right.
I think that is a note of hope.
Yeah.
That's a good place to stop. Sam, Shannon, thank you so much for this. It's a very rich conversation. So glad to have you here for it. Really grateful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for the Green Lectionary podcast. This episode was produced by Sprocket Wagner, and the music was provided by Christian McIver. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and help us spread the word with a good review. You can support this and other programs of Creation Justice Ministries at creationjustice.org/donate.
Our story comes alive within these pages, for every time and place throughout the ages. God speaks and is heard, and the enduring word calls us to care for our world as we share the love that can set creation free. Restoring the earth to wholeness, peace, and harmony. Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound within these pages. There's always new life to be found.